Today marks 100 days of my Labour government. Before that, 14 years of Tory failure, an NHS on its knees, a Tory cost of living crisis, prisons overflowing, criminals going unpunished, a raft of unfunded promises leaving you worse off, and the list goes on. The work of change has begun. The patient, calm, determined era of politics as service has begun. Planning reformed.
People used to say that Sir Keir Starmer would make a good Prime Minister because he wasn't overly political. As leader of the Labour Party, which won a sweeping victory in this summer's general election, he was often seen as somewhat wooden on the campaign trail. He wasn't a visionary type, and he didn't quite understand why, as a former prosecutor of terrorists and a knight of the realm in his early 60s, he was expected to talk so much about his parents. The common belief among those who worked with Starmer and knew him well was that 10 Downing Street was where he truly belonged, serious, dedicated, and an effective leader. People would come to know and love the real Keir once he became Prime Minister. In an otherwise insightful biography by Tom Baldwin, a former Labour communications director, Starmer's deputy Angela Rayner described her boss as the least political person I know in politics. It was like he meant as a compliment. After 14 years of turbulence and performative self-harm under the Conservative Party, the British public was ready for a little less politics too. But perhaps not quite this little. The first 100 days of the new Labour government have been deeply underwhelming. As Prime Minister, Starmer has delivered a minor scandal over alleged corruption, plenty of office gossip, and a bleak atmosphere of economic restraint. The political calendar hasn't helped. Labour came to power just before the summer parliamentary break, followed by the annual party conference season, leaving limited time to introduce legislation. But much of it has been, in the British political euphemism of the moment, missteps. A key part of Starmer's public image is his workaday demeanour. So, it hasn't looked good that since April, he has disclosed receiving nearly £40,000 worth of gifts in kind, including high-end clothes, eyeglasses, and the loan of an apartment from a single-party donor. By coincidence or not, the same donor, a TV executive and Labour peer named Wahid Ali, was given a security pass to Downing Street. The scandal, such as it is, has been dubbed passes for glasses. All of Ali's gifts, along with other donations, were duly recorded and itemized by Starmer's office. The cost of multiple pairs of glasses alone amounted to £2,485 and was swiftly seized upon by his political opponents as evidence of sleaze and the new Prime Minister enjoying the high life. Since June, Starmer and his family have received a total of 10 tickets, worth more than £7,000, to see Taylor Swift, and 4 additional tickets to horse races in Doncaster to make matters worse on October 2nd. Ali came under investigation by the House of Lords for allegedly failing to properly register his own financial interests. There have also been reports, from the early days of his government, of dysfunction among Starmer's closest advisors. In March 2023, Starmer hired Sue Gray, one of the U.K.'s most senior civil servants, to be his chief of staff, a controversial appointment. In her previous role in the Cabinet Office, Gray had led an inquiry into the parties and rule-breaking in Downing Street that occurred under Boris Johnson during the pandemic. Despite the controversy, Gray was also seen as a seasoned Whitehall operator, helping to present Starmer and Labour as a government in waiting. However, after the election, rumours began circulating among Labour insiders and in the media that Gray was a micromanager with poor political instincts. She clashed with Starmer's long-term political advisor, Morgan McSweeney, and her bureaucratic energy was said to amplify Starmer's own. It didn't help that Gray's son, a newly elected Labour MP named Liam Conlon, was also a recipient of Ali's donations. The result has been incoherence, a sense of governing without purpose. Since taking over a country and an economy weakened by years of underinvestment and political instability, Starmer and his ministers have done little more than complain about how hard everything is. Instead of charting a new direction for the UK, rising from the stagnation of austerity and the lingering damage of Brexit, the most notable political achievement of Starmer's administration has been a drastic cut to a benefits program that helps the elderly heat their homes. The contrast between this bleakness and Starmer's fancy new eyewear is not so much unfortunate as it is self-inflicted. On September 28th, Rosie Duffield, a Labour MP for Canterbury in Kent, resigned from the party in protest. "I am so ashamed of what you and your inner circle have done to tarnish and humiliate our once proud party," she wrote to Starmer. Both Labour's and Starmer's popularity ratings have plummeted. "It's a baffling situation to some extent. All my colleagues are feeling sad and disappointed because this wasn't necessary. This isn't him a Labour peer told me last week. For more than a year, it was clear the party was on course for government, so it's hard to understand how these early months could have been so aimless. It's not as if Starmer's weaknesses were a secret." After the election, Labour staffers circulated an essay titled "The Death of Deliverism" from the US, political journal Democracy, about how the Biden administration failed to derive political benefit from its economic policies due to the lack of compelling stories and emotional connections. This week, as the 100th day of Starmer's government approached, it was hard not to compare the drift to the dynamic early months of Tony Blair's Labour premiership in 1997, which followed a clear route map of policy announcements. Government isn't just about the technocratic delivery of policy and change. Alastair Campbell, Blair's former press secretary, told the BBC when asked about the performance of the new government. "It's about the relentless, endless, never-ending conversation that you're having with the country about what you are trying to do for the country. And I think it's fair to say that that bit has been largely missing." Another official from the Blair era told me, "It's a little unforgivable to come in without a plan of some sort. I mean, that is the point of being in government. You have to actually want to do something." The official was also frustrated by the donations fiasco. "They say we abided by the rules, so what's wrong with it? They don't think about how it looks, and that's the politics of it," he said. "If you're missing that, it makes it a whole lot worse." Starmer's own behavior has been erratic, swinging between aloofness and long, overwrought explanations. The Prime Minister said he needed to borrow Ali's PS18 million apartment during the election campaign so his son could have somewhere quiet to study for his high school exams. Any parent would have made the same decision. The Labour Party conference in September, a noticeably sombre event. Despite the party's landslide election victory, Starmer gave a creditable, warm speech reflecting on his love of playing the flute as a teenager. "Even now, I turn to Beethoven or Brahms in those moments when, how to put it, the reviews aren't so good," Starmer said before pausing. "I've got some Shostakovich lined up for tomorrow." I asked Baldwin, Starmer's biographer, for his impressions of the Prime Minister's early struggles. Baldwin, who served as communications director under Ed Miliband, the Labour leader before Jeremy Corbyn, is sympathetic to Starmer, but acknowledged that he has an ungainly style as a politician. "I've used this metaphor of a minefield," Baldwin said. "He takes one step forward, 2 steps to the side, 1 step back, 2 more to the side. It's inelegant, uninspiring, even confusing, but it's the best way to get to the other side. In opposition, the other side was victory. In government so far. He looks more like a man wandering around a minefield without a clear sense of direction." Baldwin noted that Starmer has faced similar situations before, both early in his time as head of the Crown Prosecution Service and as party leader, and that he managed to get it together. "It almost has to get quite bad before he recognizes a change of course is necessary," Baldwin said. "But when he does recognize a problem, he's ruthless." On October 2nd, Starmer announced that he had repaid some PS6,000 worth of gifts received since becoming Prime Minister and that hospitality rules for ministers would be revised. 4 days later, Gray resigned as Starmer's Chief of Staff and was replaced by McSweeney. Signs emerged that Starmer was finding his footing. Westminster buzzed with talk of a relaunch in Starmer 2.0. "It's good to have a serious Prime Minister." That hasn't changed since before or after the election, said the Blair-era official. This is recoverable. People writing off a government after 2 months, with a huge majority and 5 years ahead, is ludicrous. Baldwin suggested that Starmer return to the 5 missions framework that underpinned Labour's election campaign: economic growth, green energy, public safety, education, and the NHS, but has since been lost in the noise. I don't think he can now claim to have discovered a new fundamental purpose for the government, Baldwin said. There's a real danger of being ridiculed if he tries. The missions are personal to him. They matter. On Wednesday, I watched Starmer respond to Prime Minister's questions in the House of Commons. PMQs are British politics at their silliest and most self-referential, but also crucial tests of a leader's resilience and the energy of their parliamentary support. Starmer arrived just before noon, took a sip of water, and cracked a rueful smile. As a former prosecutor, the Commons' jeers rarely faze him. His main opponent this week was Rishi Sunak, the former Prime Minister and outgoing Conservative leader. Starmer was eager to highlight what his government was doing, introducing a bill to strengthen workers' rights and hosting an upcoming international investment summit. Sunak used his questions to reference Gray's departure, the Ali donations, and possible tax increases, but Starmer used every response on topics ranging from family doctors in the Midlands to Basingstoke's High Street. From hospices in Bolton to flooding in Gosport to hammer the Tories' record and the mess they left behind. He pointed to a PS2 $2 billion black hole in public finances. Each time Starmer attacked the Conservatives, Labour MPs behind him cheered. It was blunt, but it worked. He seemed to enjoy himself. I recalled what the Blair official had said: politics isn't just about beating up the other side. That Starmer and Labour won power in Britain without saying very much, or at least not anything compelling, because the alternative was unelectable. It's the difference between a positive and a negative mandate, the official said. If you win on a negative mandate because the other side collapsed, it's hard to get a positive mandate. Starmer still has time, but not much, to find his story.